Hello, welcome back to our discussion of CSS, this time the alternative box model. So our reference, search for the box model on the MDN page. Also, there's useful information on the W3 Schools page on the box model. So the alternative CSS box model, it's just a simple change in box arithmetic. It's simple, but it takes a while to wrap your head around it. We'll look at some examples. So in the standard box model that we've learned before, really, box sizing, content box attribute. The height and width properties apply to the content box. That is the center of the content. Then padding, border, and margin properties, which are commonly expressed, are added to that to get the size on the page. I put margin in italics here because it's not really part of the element. It's considered outside of the element, but it still functions to push content away. So we didn't express this in the CSS we showed before because this is the default setting for the box sizing, the content box. The alternative box model, box sizing, border box. So height and width properties apply to the border box. That is, the content wrapped in the padding, wrapped in the border. Since padding and border are explicit properties, as these increase, the content box shrinks. So the total size on a page, the border box plus the margin. So you look at the height and width properties. Now that expresses the border box of the element on the page, and you just add the margin to it in order to get the size of it on the page. Let's look at an example. So this is an example from the past, previous example from the content box. Last time we didn't express it explicitly, and this time we do because we want to contrast it to the border box, which is applied here. So with the box size being content box, then the height and width on the page express the content box. Let's look at this in the browser. The browser will show it to us. Let's right-click here, and we're going to do inspect on this element. And down here opens up a window, and you can see the box model right there. That's the content box. Notice the size of it. The content box is the height and the width, to which padding, border, and margin are used. Notice how that colors in the browser itself as we go out here are the total size on the page, right? How it's positioned on the page, with up to here being the element itself. This tool also allows you to edit these properties. So you can start to debug your CSS, like what happens if this is this? Well, that's going to be the width property, so it pushes that out. Notice that let's increase the margin here, or decrease the margin to 0. So that one margin element goes back, collapses back. But notice the margin background is the same as the body background because it's really outside of the element. Let's take a look now and examine this alternative box model down below. And really, the only change is the additional class here, the alternate. So this sizing is going to be border box. And remember in border box that the box sizing is the size at the border, right? Which has already included the padding and the content. So notice now here, the content size is shrunk down because it's a competitor for height and width with padding and border. So notice here, when I increase the border or one of these dimensions in the standard box model, here let's increase this to 60. And look what happens to the content dimension. It shrinks even more because the 20 I added to the padding, which shows itself over here, the 20 units I added to padding took away 20 units from the content. If we get ridiculous, let's say make the border now 50, which is larger than the content size. Content now, at least in this dimension, is shrunk down to 0. The height is shrunk down to 0. But notice there's no space, 0 times 60. HTML will work and the browser will work to show everything. But this is that. We've competed it down to nothing. at least in theory. It doesn't drop to negative. I'll refresh the page and put those dimensions back. So let's get at why this border box is a relatively new invention. So what motivated it? It's just a change in the arithmetic. It doesn't add any richness to the CSS itself. It doesn't add any new capabilities that were there already. What it adds is arithmetic convenience for the designer. When you're placing elements on the page, you're mostly concerned with how the element positions itself, and you really want to look at the one dimension, the height and the width, as a summary of the border plus the padding plus the content if you're designing these elements to fit on the page. So it's just to make the human being's arithmetic a little simpler. Indeed, when you look at discussions on the internet about this and say, well, when would you want to use content box? It's the designers that are concerned with the layout inside the content that switch over and use content box, because then height and width applies more straightforwardly in that context. But most of the time, as a web designer, you're going to be positioning elements as they look on the page and let the content flow be a little bit more complicated. So that's why going forward, when you look at CSS, most of the time expresses elements in border box, especially when we get to CSS frameworks like Bootstrap. Thank you.